Kate, welcome to the Confessions of an Ex-Therapist podcast.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. We I don't know if your audience knows or not, but we recorded an episode of my podcast, and in my introduction I said like it's not usual that I have someone I don't know on my podcast, right? And we got into a phone call and we were like, okay. We're best friends. We're clearly on the same page. So I'm just so honored to be able to, come back and reciprocate and come on yours.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. And I would, yeah, exactly. If you haven't checked out Kate's podcast, I mean, we're going to link all the things here, but we had such a wonderful conversation. And I felt like we could have actually had three conversations that day, right?
For
Like
sure.
three
Totally.
different sort of like
Totally.
niched topics that are related and sort of, where your world intersects with my world. And so I'm so excited for this conversation today. So before we jump in, I've done a bit of an intro. We've got your bio here, but I'd love for you to simply tell the audience, who are you and what you do in your own words.
Oh, great. Thank you. Well, my name is Kate Anthony, and I am a divorce and discernment coach, which is sort of the best way that I've come up with sort of my elevator pitching of like what I do. Essentially, I help women make the hardest decision of their lives. Should I stay or should I go? I mostly work with women, with cis hetero women in cis hetero relationships for a variety of reasons, but because those are the ones that I feel have the most impact by the patriarchal cultural impacts, and they struggle with those things, and that's sort of my area of expertise. And I run a podcast which you were on, called the
Mhm.
Divorce Survival Guide podcast. So I take women from the decision-making process all the way through the actual, getting divorced, going through it, the logistics, the like how to process the emotions of this crazy upside down experience that they go through.
I love that. And just for my own, curiosity here now as you're talking, um, the women that you work with, Kate, when they come to you, have they made a decision or are they?
Well, look, if you're Googling, should I stay or should I go in the middle of the night, you're probably not in a healthy, happy relationship. So a lot of what I do is help women come to terms with the feelings that they're already having,
That
right?
totally makes sense. Yeah. Mhm.
And help them sort of parse, like, a lot of them are like, but I'm also a problem, or he's a problem, but I'm also right. And so like, what does that mean? And like pulling it all apart. And really sort of getting to the nitty gritty nuts and bolts, the bottom of the barrel of how many metaphors can we use here? Um,
Love
of
it.
what's really going on in the relationship,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, um, I've had people stay. I
Mhm.
have,
Mm.
and most of the time when they stay, it's actually because their husbands have really done a turnaround. Um,
Okay.
because
Interesting.
they're women who've come to me are like, I've been doing everything. I just want to go to therapy. I want to work on this. And, he won't go.
Mhm.
And this is the sort of patriarchal stuff that I really talk about a lot in my work, which is, toxic masculinity and how sad it is that we've gotten to a point that men not all, but so often resist this kind of work and the kind of help that is so available.
Yeah. That's
I
right.
have heard men say, I would rather get divorced than go to therapy.
Yeah. Me too.
And that's right. And it's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
heartbreaking because, wow, really? You'd rather
Mhm.
lose everything than risk opening the lid of, look, it may be a Pandora's box.
For
Like, I
sure.
get it, but you'd rather lose everything.
Yeah.
And sometimes they really would,
Yeah. And
you
that's
know?
exactly what I was just talking about this actually with somebody the other day, that what it comes down to, I think, is that fear of what's going to be uncovered if I show up. If I show up to
Right.
therapy, if I show up to see a coach or whatever it is, right? Like if I
Yep.
show up, what's going to be underneath the blanket that I've used for so long to cover all of it up? And then am I going to be challenged on my stuff, right? Am I going to have to change?
Right. And it's like, what's so amazing about that is, don't you want to?
Mm,
Right?
yeah.
Like to me,
Yeah.
and of course, like, look, I'm a coach, you're a therapist, like, of
Yeah.
like for us, but I do a lot of values work with my clients and in my program. And the value, I remember having a client once, she went through her values and she was like, okay, so my top value, the one that means the most to me, is about personal growth and change.
Mm,
And, obviously she was working with a life coach privately, she was in therapy, all the things. And she's like, he does not share that value.
right.
In fact, he will say that he's like, well, I'm the same as I was like 20 years ago. Like, I haven't changed at all. You've
Hmm.
changed. And she's like, that. And I said, look, take the judgment out of that,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Yep.
It's just a mismatch.
That's right. That's right. Look at it with a little more emotional neutrality. Look, right? Like just sort of get
Right,
curious
totally.
about that. Yeah, I love that.
Right.
I love that.
Yep.
I'd love for you to share, um, should you stay or should you go? Like how do you help a woman navigate that question? Because it's a huge question with so many, oh man, like it just that just the trickle
So many
effect of is
implications,
so
right?
many implications,
Like,
right?
it
Like,
goes on forever. Totally.
mm-hmm,
Yep.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. And so we do it slowly, and we start at the personal work.
hmm,
We don't start at with the big stuff. We start with you, right? We're going to look at your family history. We're going to look at whatever traumas you're carrying and you're holding, generational cycles. We're going to look at, why are you in this marriage, right?
mm-hmm,
If it's an abusive situation, which I work with a lot, why did you choose? Like, okay, let's put his behavior aside for a minute. Why did you marry this person? What is
mm-hmm.
why is he your imago match, or whatever, however you want to break it down. But if he's, can I use bad words on your
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
bad
Uh-huh.
words?
Go
But
for
if
it.
he's the asshole,
Yeah.
right? Like, why did you marry an asshole?
Right. Right.
And that's not a blame thing.
No.
We're going to go back to your family history. We're going to go back to your childhood. We're going to figure out why this man was your match, why
Mm-hmm.
you chose this person. Or this woman. I do work across, but it's generally cis hetero relationships. So we're going to start there,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, it kind of takes you to a place of emotional neutrality, because then all the things that you've been putting so much focus on him, and he's doing this and he's doing this and he's doing this and he's doing this, and when you look at your own stuff and you're like, oh, he may be doing all these things, but like, here I am, and how am I? And we would do a ton of work on codependency.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it does take them to a place of emotional neutrality, and they can look at the relationship more objectively from that
Yes.
perspective.
Right.
And then we do the relationship work. So I have a relationship inventory. I have a lot of education on abuse and
Mm.
emotional abuse, because I deal with it so often, um, that we just have to, right? We have to
Mm-hmm.
cover it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, then we start to look at, and then, like, communication styles and all of that stuff. But again, the root of it is the self work.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting because I think that's where you and I are so aligned in terms of our approach and how we see the work is that it might seem that the place to start is like, let's just jump in and look at the relationship, right? I often get that as well in the work that I do. But really, where we want to start is looking at the self inside the relationship, the person, the woman
Absolutely.
inside the relationship, and how is she showing up and what's her self image and what are her narratives and, all of those sorts of pieces. You said
Yep.
something that I want to I want to pick your brain on. You said that you work with a lot of women where there's perhaps abuse in the relationship. There are some symptoms of codependency. I guess what I wonder is the question of should you stay or should you go? Is that layered or nuanced differently when a woman is experiencing abuse, is stuck in the cycle of codependency, right? Like what have you noticed in terms of even the weight of the question of should you stay or should you go?
Well, I mean, look, I think that people who don't suffer from codependency, when they're unhappy in a relationship, they don't really have any qualms about being like, "Hey, I'm out."
Yeah.
You know? So, those of us who suffer from codependency, and it's most of us,
Hmm.
by the way, like, it really is, it's most of
Right.
us because we've all had some kind of trauma, some kind of addiction in our families. Like, I don't know a family that doesn't
Yep.
have these things. Um, but there is so much of that ingrained. Yes, right. If you're codependent, it is going to be more difficult for you um, to go through this because you don't know you're allowed to choose.
Yeah.
When we're codependent, we've given so much of our power
Hmm.
over to somebody else,
Yeah.
whether it was a parent or and then it became our spouse. So there's and then also we have the cultural issue where, women don't know that we get to choose,
Right. Well, and
right?
even just asking the question, Kate, right? Like
It's
even
radical,
Googling the question, should I stay or should I go?
right? It's
Right? Begins
radical
it totally. Yeah. Yeah. It
for
begins to like
women.
push us in that direction of choice.
Yes, exactly. Even taking that step of questioning it, right? But we also don't know that we're allowed to choose, right? So,
Mhm.
we wait for men to ask us to dance, boys to ask us to dance. We wait for them to ask us on dates. We wait for them to, ask us to marry them. And so the idea, excuse me, as a woman that we have choice, like what? you know,
Right.
and then very often we'll bring it to I have so many women who, when they have the conversation, their husbands will say, like, you don't get to make that decision. You don't get to
Right.
make a unilateral decision for our family.
Right.
And my response is, yes, you do.
Right.
That's what divorce
Right.
is. It is a
Mhm.
unilateral decision. Usually it is not a collaborative decision.
That's right. So interesting you say that because I don't practice, one-to-one care as a psychotherapist anymore, but I remember how many conversations did I have with women in my practice where we talked about this idea that, you know, if your goal in making this decision is getting your partner to understand, to validate, to accept, like any of those things, we'll be sitting here a really long time. Right?
I
Because it's
Yeah, I
very
always
rare that
say
that happens.
no. And I say to them, I say this all the time. I have a podcast episode and a blog post about this. This is not a conversation. It is a
Mm,
declaration. You will
mm,
never get permission. Like, stop
right,
looking for permission, first of all.
right.
You will not get permission. You will not get agreement.
Mm,
You won't get, or you likely won't, right? And
yes,
again,
yeah,
you're right. If you keep asking for permission or keep waiting for them to agree with you, you'll be there forever.
that's right. That's right. And that can't be the goal, right? Like that can't be the outcome that we're looking for when
No.
we're beginning with that question of should I stay or should I go?
Right. No, no, the exactly. When you're beginning the question, you have to get clear for yourself first
Yeah.
and do the work to get clear for yourself first, and then you bring your decision to your partner.
Yes.
And it is a
Right.
decision. And
Yes.
look, if if you have the conversation right, I have an actual, like, a sort of a template, like a script for how this conversation needs to go. I
Hmm.
have a blog post about it, so I'll make sure you have it so we can
That's
link it in the
great.
show notes.
Thank you.
Um, but there's a template for how to have this conversation, which will foster more agreement if possible,
Mm,
right? Like, there's a way to have this conversation really badly where
sure.
it's going to blow up.
Right.
But there's also a way to have this conversation where if there's agreement to be had, if there's understanding to be had, it it'll be more likely to show up.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. And I think just what you've shared so far, Kate, just in terms of helping us unpack how you even begin to process that question, I can imagine has probably, there's a woman out there listening that's had some aha moments around that, right? Like, oh, okay. Like the process
Right.
looks very different than how I had imagined it in my mind,
Absolutely.
right? I love
Absolutely.
that.
And this is why this is sort of why, and I have a program, by the way. I have an online program that helps so if anyone's listening is like I actually have an online program that'll walk you through this. It's called Should I Stay or Should I Go? Um and um Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, this is why we look to professionals because I do this all day, every day. I have seen every iteration of this
Mm,
question of I've seen every response to it. I've seen, right. I've been through this with so many hundreds and hundreds of women. So it's like it's mapped out for you. This is probably your first time ever going through this.
right.
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 And by the way, I do this because I struggled with this.
Right.
I struggled with this so badly for so long.
Right.
Um, and I just when I got to the other side, I was like, there's gotta be an easier way
Mm,
than just
hmm.
waiting for me to like explode and be like, I'm done. Right.
Right.
Because that's just
Right.
not the best way to do it.
Yeah. And I think often, in my experience, in my opinion, I think when we come to the work through personal experience, that just amplifies our ability to support and to impact and to, empathize and, all of those sorts of things. I remember you sharing that
Absolutely.
with me when we had first met. And absolutely, yeah, I think it's so important to come to the work from that perspective,
Yeah,
especially
absolutely.
this kind of work.
Yeah.
So what I'd love to know then is, you support a woman, should I stay or should I go? You sort of work through that. And then how do you, once you've identified some of the toxic patterns, perhaps some of the toxic behaviors, thoughts, things like that, that may have contributed
Mhm.
to you selecting a certain type of partner, right? Because I do believe we select partners consciously,
Absolutely.
unconsciously, we select partners. And so
Absolutely.
even toxic partners we select. So how do you
100%.
avoid making those
I did
mistakes?
it. Yeah, it's a great question.
How do you make new selections, right? Like how do you change your selection process?
You work really hard with a therapist or a coach, preferably both. And right? It's interesting. My therapist is like, she's like, I don't believe we heal trauma.
Mm,
And I think that was a very sort of insightful thing that she said that I've never gone deeper with her on. Like, wait a minute, say more about that. I need to learn. I need to hear
right.
but right. So whether we heal trauma or not, we can address our trauma. We can go to therapy and at least begin a healing process, right? We can do the work such that, those people are no longer I have to tell you that when I meet a guy who mirrors all of the things that I used to choose,
Mm,
I'm like, "Woo!"
right.
Like, "Get me out of here."
Yeah.
I
Red
can
flag
see it. I'm
central. Hmm.
attracted to it. Here's the
Mm,
difference though, right? My unconscious is like so attracted to it and so drawn to it and all
hmm.
of that. But my conscious adult brain, that's my child brain that's
Yeah.
like,
Yep.
right? But I have exercised the muscle of my adult discerning brain enough that it's strong enough and it's stronger now that it actually makes the choices.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
I can be like, "Oh, check you out, girl. You really want some of that, don't you?"
Mhm.
But that's not
Yep.
what we do anymore.
Right. Right.
And that's the thing. It's what therapy does really is help us grow that, prefrontal cortex part of our brain that's making the rational, reasoned emotionally intelligent decisions
Mm,
as opposed to like the child brain being like, I want some of that. I want some of
yep.
that. That looks familiar. I recognize that, daddy heal me,
Right. Right.
really. Um, so by doing this work. That's what it is. It's really by doing the work, by digging deeply and doing the work and understanding those patterns. And the more
Yeah.
you understand the patterns, the more you can recognize them in yourself. Like if you have always dated the same kind of person, even if he looks completely different,
Right.
even if I mean, my mom used to say you could line my boyfriends up against a wall and like I had no type, right? You
Right.
would never imagine that the same woman dated them all.
Right.
But yet,
But
there
yet
was
there was a common
a
thread.
lot of
Hmm.
similarities, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't look the same, but boy, did they feel the same.
Yes. Yes.
And it is doing that work. It is working to understand those things. The more that you bring conscious awareness to the choices that you're making and the patterns and the red flags, the more you start to notice these things consciously in your adult brain and you can override that decision. The astonishing thing is that, in the US and probably similar in Canada, right? About 50% of first marriages end in divorce. I think
Yep.
that
It's
number is
about the
going
same here.
down,
Yeah.
but
Yep.
um, 68% of second marriages also end in
Hmm.
divorce. And
Hmm.
then 74% of third marriages do.
Right.
And this is the reason, because
This
we're
is
not doing the
absolutely the
work.
reason. Yep.
We're not getting underneath the choices that we're making
Hmm.
and rewiring our brains
Yes.
to make new choices.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. And I love that you described it that way, right? The process of change really goes back to increased awareness around our patterns, right? And making conscious decisions around
Hmm.
how we're going to respond, because it doesn't mean that those patterns, those feelings are not going to be activated or triggered, or we're not going to be drawn or attracted to the same type of person, right?
Right.
That's ingrained patterning that goes
100%.
very, very deep, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, like I remember going on a date with a guy last year, just
Hmm.
pre-pandemic. So I don't know, a year and a half ago. Time,
It's been a long
time.
time. It's been a long time.
I don't even know what time is anymore. But anyway, I went on a date with a guy. In hindsight, looking at back on it, I'm like, he was a raging alcoholic.
Right.
Raging alcoholic. I mean, he was all of the things that I'm drawn to. He was a bad boy. He smoked. He was like in a leather jacket. He was also a little too old for that. Like I'm
Mm,
50. So he was in
right.
his 50s and he's a dad, right?
Right.
So there's something about it but yet in the moment I was like all titillated by it.
Right.
But as soon as I left that date, I was like, "Oh my God."
Right. Right.
Like,
That
hell
rational
no.
brain kicked in real fast.
Whew, and it was like this, intoxication in the moment and like wanting him
Right.
to like me and wanting
Hmm.
him to choose me and pick me and like all of those
Yeah.
things because whew, man, that's sexy as hell. And
Mm.
I knew like unconsciously that was gonna be a ride. That was gonna be
Right.
a ride.
Right.
And there's a part of me that is addicted to that ride.
Mm.
And I swear I got home and I had like a visceral reaction
Mm.
to being in that space because I hadn't been in that space in at least a decade.
Right.
And I was like, "Oh my God." Like it was like
Mm.
a physical, chemical, like
Yep.
detox.
Yes.
I was like, that's the worst,
Yeah.
the worst idea in the world,
Yeah.
And
But you
so
know what?
we
Yeah.
have it, but then we get off of it.
But that's what's I love that you just shared that story, because think about it. Change, I always say this to my clients, change or transformation is not that you're never going to be triggered again, you're never going to be activated again, or that thing isn't going to like pull you in again.
Oh,
Transformation is that it's going to happen and you're going to
yes.
kind of like slip a little bit. And
Yeah,
then
you're
guess
gonna
what's
be
going to
like,
happen?
"Woo."
Yeah, you're going to catch yourself.
Right.
You're going to catch yourself. And then
Exactly.
you're number one, you're going to catch yourself a lot sooner than you probably ever have in the past. And number two, you're going to pause long enough to make a decision,
That's right. That's
right? Like at the end of
exactly
the
right.
day,
You're
that's
putting space. Yes, what growth and transformation is putting space between your reaction and your action,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's really what emotional intelligence is,
Right.
and what that growth is. And that's exactly right, right? Like I could have gone home with that dude. I could have like, whew, I could have embarked on the whole thing,
Yes.
right? But there was that space where I was like, ooh, this is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And then
Yeah.
I had enough of that space in the moment to go home.
Yeah.
And then when I got home, I was able to take more of that space because, guys like that, by the way, they part of their, you know, arsenal
Mm-hmm.
is not giving you that space.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Right. Right.
It's that keeping you off balance for long enough that you can never quite get your footing and
Yes.
think in that way.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
All right. So, my final question related to this is you've
Mhm.
done the work. You're beginning to understand the patterns. You're able to take space, right, between reaction and action, right? When is a good time to start dating again? Like, how do you know? How do you even know when you're ready to start dating again?
So, the most important thing to know, and I say this to all codependent women with so much love and understanding and like solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between dating and being in a relationship.
Mm,
And most of us don't know the difference.
interesting.
I know
Say
I sure
more.
as hell
Yeah.
didn't. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I got out of my marriage, I was like, cool, let's find the next husband.
Right.
you know?
Right. Yes.
I mean, I had this whole narrative about, and by the way, this was, I think, a decade into my like personal development and codependency work.
Yeah.
So again,
Yes.
this shit is always ongoing. And so I always say, date as soon as you feel like it,
Mm,
right? If you need to get out there and you need to start feeling good about yourself again,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
go out on dates, get on dating apps, like do it. Because dating is probably one of the most sort of fertile ground for learning about yourself,
True.
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
problem is when we go out on dates and we're constantly when I started dating, when I first got out of my marriage, my focus was always on them. I was taking their temperature. Do they like me? Do they like me? And do they like me? Do they like me? My therapist was like, "Do you like him?" And
Right.
I was like, "Um, oh."
Mm.
You
Never asked myself that
like,
question.
he's kind of a dick.
Right.
Like, why am I right? And
Mhm.
so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at being able to date and take our own temperature and start to learn about ourselves and like, oh wow, look at that. I'm totally drawn to that bad guy, alcoholic in the
Yes.
leather jacket. Huh, interesting, right? Or we go all the way down that path, but it's dating.
Mm.
So I say date as soon as you want, but don't get into a relationship.
Yes, I like that. And just
Don't get
making that
into
distinction, right? Even just saying, hey, listen, these are two different terms.
they're very different terms.
Uh-huh.
They're very
Uh-huh.
different terms. It's very hard because we get out of our marriages and we think we're dating and we
Mm-hmm.
start that dating process and then we meet someone and he's amazing. I hear
Yeah.
this all the time. But he's
Right.
amazing. You have known him for 4 hours, 2 hours. If you've gone on it one
Right.
date, and I hear this after date one, you've known the person for 2 hours.
Right. Right.
He's not amazing.
Right.
You've no idea who he is or what he is. He showed up well for 2 hours. That's what you know,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, um, so we do this. God, do we do this? And then we decide that we're in a relationship with this person after 2 hours
Yeah.
or after a second date. So that's what, 4
Right.
or 5 hours, like if the date goes long, which it shouldn't, by the way. You want to go and then the sort of rule now is that we have sex on a third date. So you've known someone
Right.
for 6 hours and you are engaging in the most intimate act that
Yes.
we humans can engage in. Like,
Yes.
no, you do not.
Right.
So
And the emotional toll that that takes, like, I mean, that's probably a whole other episode, as we said last time we
Right.
chatted, right? Yeah,
Exactly.
it's
Right.
it's it's huge.
Yeah. So I say dating is dating. Go on lots
Hmm.
of dates. Go on lots of
Hmm.
first dates. Go on second dates. If you like someone, keep dating them, but also keep dating other people. Keep getting,
Right.
because you're learning about yourself. And
Yes.
look, if after a few months this one person is still there, then like, all right, like that's fine.
Hmm.
Move along. But I will say I won't date anybody as a divorced woman.
Hmm.
I will not date anyone at this point who hasn't been divorced for at least 2 years,
Right. Right.
because there's just too much. I don't date newly divorced people because Jesus Christ, I coach them in my real life. I'm not coaching them in
Right.
my oosh, been there, done that. Um, and they're not emotionally ready.
Hmm. Hmm. Yep.
I got into a relationship with someone who years and years ago. And he told me he was like 3 months out of his marriage,
Hmm.
but that wasn't actually true.
Right.
Which I figured out when I went to his apartment and it was not furnished. So it was only a couple of weeks,
Hmm.
and we dove into this relationship, and I was like, "You're not ready for this." And he's like, "Kate, I left my marriage to find this.
Mm.
This is why I got out of my marriage. It may be too soon, but like, you know." And we were together for a year, and in the end, he was like, "It was too soon."
Right.
You know, it was
Right.
too soon.
Right.
He
Right.
hadn't figured out who he was on
Yes.
his own before diving into this relationship with me, and that wasn't fair to me, to him, to like anybody.
Yes.
So find out who you are first,
Yeah. And
for the love of
it
God.
the word that keeps jumping up for me as we're talking today, Kate, is self-image, 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 right? Like it at
Mm,
the end of the day, so much of our capacity to navigate our relationships well, for us to enjoy our relationships, for us to maintain a sense of individuality in the midst of attachment, really comes back to our self-image, right? Like I
yeah.
think our capacity for awesome relationships will never outgrow our own self-image. Do you know what
Mm,
I mean? Like my
yeah.
self-image determines the capacity that I have for intimacy and for connection, like all those things within a
Yeah.
relationship.
And we choose based on that, right? So if I
Yes,
have a shitty self-image, I'm going to choose someone that matches what I think of myself,
that's
right?
exactly
Which is
true. Yeah.
right, the codependency piece, which is why we get into these unhealthy relationships, because we're choosing unhealthy partners because we think that they match.
Yes,
That we think
that's
that's what
right.
we deserve,
That's
right?
right. That's right. It absolutely
Mhm.
comes back to that. Thank you so much for that. I know we're going to link up the blog post that you talked about. We've got links to all your places. You've got an amazing private Facebook community. Should I stay or should I go? I love how simple your names are. We know exactly what we're getting. And an
We know what we get.
incredible podcast, the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. We're going to link all of that up. Where else can people find you, Kate? Like, where's the best place to kind of come and be in your genius, to understand your wisdom and really connect with you?
Probably my Facebook group is the best place. My Should I
Hmm.
Stay or Should I Go Facebook group. And it's also for people who are going through divorce. And then Instagram at the Divorce Survival Guide, TikTok at the Divorce Survival Guide, just starting out there.
Good for you.
Oh, I know, right? It's like all the things, all the things. But yeah, that's really those are the best places. If you
Amazing.
want me, the Facebook group, I'm in
The
there a
face,
lot.
I would think so. I would think so. Amazing. Kate, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.